and welcome to the virtual, welcome to the virtual meeting for Bruce Beach, for the Bruce Beach Project. My name is Lee Altman. I'm with SCAPE, Landscape Architecture. I'll be your MC for the evening. We will start with a brief welcome from Mayor Grover Robinson, followed by Council Member Delarian Wiggins, who's both chairperson of the CRA and represents District 7 on the council. So Mayor Robinson, over to you.
Lee, thank you so much. Thank you all of you for joining here. Those of you who I saw several names as it popped up also had joined us for hashtag. Obviously, Bruce Beach and hashtag and getting us through this design phase to get both of these finalized and put them together, use the funds we've already got available, but also partnering with some other funding sources to build them out is going to be important to fully creating what we want to see in a viable downtown. This project and this amenity is as important as any to the area. There's very few places you can go in a downtown setting and have a true beach opportunity there. Plus, there is so much about this site that we need to preserve the historical content of what it has been and what it is and what it means to generations of Pensacolians is important also in that discussion. But we definitely are looking for the future. And how do we create something that is also inclusive for everyone to have that experience? I'm very confident in what the team is doing with SCAPE, and I think this is going to be exciting. Tonight and tomorrow night, we need your input to help us finalize these plans. Again, we come forward with things that we believe we've heard. This is the reason we have this event tonight, is for you to give us your input and for us to probably tweak it as we move forward before final. But again, the exciting part is just coming up with something. And this certainly needs to stay an amenity park area. As I was talking with Gina from SCAPE right before we started. You don't have to look any further than this past weekend to see that we still have storm events. So there is an importance to this property, to the resiliency of downtown as well. So trying to really keep up everything, an amenity, a cultural and historical asset, in a true place for us to sort of an environmental absorbing area as well. Really using this beach to do 3 or 4 things for our community are going to be important, and we're glad that you're on here tonight to help us do that. Probably the person as important as anything else in getting this going is certainly our council member for that area, is also the chairman of the CRA, is Councilman Delarian Wiggins, and I'd like him to also be able to give some welcoming remarks. Delarian, I'll pass it over to you.
Well, Mayor, again, thank you for that. Again, thank each and every one of you for just taking the opportunity to just come on and visit with us while we show you just a glimpse of what we're doing with Bruce Beach. Your input is definitely needed. And again, we just want to say thank you. HDR has done a great job with designing this beach. So glad you all are here. Please come out tomorrow for the in-person meeting. It is greatly needed. Again, it'll be at if it's not has changed, it should be at the amphitheater down at the Maritime Park. So we're looking forward to you all coming down as well and providing your input and actually looking at the conceptual design there, and also getting your input on some of the things that you may want to see thus far. So again, thank you all for just taking this opportunity to come out and share this presentation with us, and looking forward to seeing you guys tomorrow and giving it back to you guys.
Lee, a little housekeeping note for tomorrow. I think Councilman Wiggins touched on it a little bit. We absolutely would love to have this outside at the Maritime Park, and we think it's adjacent to the space. It's good to have it outside for a variety of different reasons. We'd rather have it there. However, obviously the weather we're having right now, we can't predict that. So if we're not able, if it's inclement weather tomorrow, we do have a backup plan to have it at Hagler Mason in City Hall. So don't let the weather hold you up. If it ends up raining, we will turn this into an inside event. But our preference is to have this tomorrow at the amphitheater. So, but there is a backup in the event that we do have rain.
Thank you, Mayor. We always want that backup option. And thanks both for the warm welcome. Before we start, a little bit about what we'll discuss today. So we'll provide a brief overview of where this project originated as part of the Pensacola Waterfront Framework Plan, discuss the goals of the Bruce Beach project in particular, and then go over some of the comments that the team received from the public and the previous public meeting that was held in February of last year, over a year now. We will then hear from HDR, who are leading the design effort, and they will share with us how the design of the project has evolved from the concept, and how some of the site conditions and constraints have informed the process. We'll talk a little bit about the anticipated schedule for implementation and discuss next steps for incorporating some of the important historical aspects of the site into the design. We'll have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions in the larger forum, but we hope to have more of an open discussion in small breakout groups. We find those to be just a little bit more productive than your typical Q&A. Just a few housekeeping items. We are, as you know, we're recording the meeting. The recording will be available on the city's website and with a link to the YouTube channel. If you need to leave early, or if you want to share it with others who are not able to attend today or who can't make it tomorrow for the in-person meeting. If you have any questions or comments, we encourage you to type them up in the chat. You'll see a little chat button at the bottom of the screen. The chat goes directly to the meeting host, so we won't be able to open kind of open the mic and necessarily respond to all the comments on the spot, but we are recording all of them, and they'll help inform the design and kind of help guide the design team forward. We have muted all of the participants just to avoid any background noises or audio issues. So again, anything you want to raise, just please type it into the chat. And during the small group discussions, you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask questions more directly. So last thing before we start is I'd like to introduce our team, the team that you'll hear from today. So HDR, as noted, are leading the design. Alan Vinson is the project manager. Robbie Bryant is the design lead. April Catini is the senior landscape architect, and Philip Walker is the civil engineer on the project. SCAPE is providing design advisory services, making sure that the design stays consistent with the principles that were developed through the framework plan process, and facilitating community engagement. So Gina Worth is our design principal, and Jessica and myself are working with her on the project. We are also working with Angela Kyle, who's a Pensacola native, and James Lima and Yushang Lo from James Lima Planning and Development, who are assisting us with some of the community engagement and economic analysis on the project. You'll hear a little bit from Angela later today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Gina, who will tell us how this whole thing started.
Thank you, Lee, and thanks to everyone, Mayor and team, for enabling this great conversation this evening. You know, I'll just speak really briefly on the origins of the Bruce Beach project in its current iteration, because I know many community groups and residents have been working and volunteering and kind of thinking big about Bruce Beach for decades now. And so we really tried to build on that energy and that attention to the site at Bruce Beach and Washerwoman Creek with the Waterfront Framework Plan that our office helped collectively develop with all of you, with many residents of Pensacola over a year ago now. So that Waterfront Framework is shown here on the screen in front of you. I think if you go to the next slide, Lee, we call out a couple of the key projects that were identified within the Waterfront Framework. The goal here was really to reconnect Pensacola with Pensacola Bay. That Pensacola is known as a region that has incredible beachfront communities and tourism-driven areas, but that the Bay is also a resource for Main Street and downtown Pensacola, and that there could be a stronger embrace of the city and the watery edge. So certain projects like the Waterfront Connector, which now is known as the hashtag, which we had a public meeting about a month and a half ago on, because that project is also advancing, is an effort to really reconnect the downtown area with the waterfront and enable more multimodal transportation to stitch along the waterfront edge. That project connects up to the project that we're here tonight to discuss, the Bruce Beach Park, which is shown in the bubble on the left, which envisions a community park that has a naturalized shoreline edge that's a resilient design that provides a site to really feature and focus on the diverse cultural histories, including the African American history of the site, and connect some of that energy of the downtown and the investment of the downtown that's been made in Pensacola to the neighborhoods of Pensacola on the western side to really stitch out and connect and provide a whole new series of unique public spaces that embrace and engage the water's edge. So this was part of this big vision plan. If you go to the next slide, Lee. I can talk a little bit about some of the conceptual goals for the Bruce Beach project. The first is quite literal, to connect people to the water. This is one of the very unique sites where there is a beachy condition. You know, there's definitely safety concerns that need to be dealt with and considered, but there's an incredible low slope gradient of beach to the shoreline, and the ability here to have a more naturalized shoreline edge and resilient soft shoreline. So we're very excited about that. There's also the potential and the goal to restore and enhance local ecosystems, to highlight, preserve, and expand the great variety of species that exist on the site today and introduce new native species to the site to really use it as a place to showcase and enhance the bay ecology. Next slide. To mark and commemorate the African American history and heritage of the site. The site was once the site of an African American pool, and it has a long legacy and history as being a very important point, not only for residents of Pensacola in the past, but for residents of the greater Southeast region. So it's a very important site that if you didn't know that history walking around today, you might not be aware of that. And the goal of this project is to really commemorate that, tell those stories, and make sure that visitors to the site can experience that history in different ways. We're also looking to design for educational activities, to think about how school groups can come to the site, and both within indoor and outdoor facilities, you know, use Bruce Beach as a place for education, for outdoor stewardship, for classrooms, for learning activities directly along the shore. It's a great place for it because you can get right down to the water's edge. Next slide. And then, you know, we spoke to this at the greater waterfront scale of the city within the Waterfront Framework Plan. But the goal of Bruce Beach is to build on the existing enhancements that have been made to create a cultural and educational destination at the bay's edge, to really bring Pensacola to the bay's edge. Next slide. And so with that, I think, you know, the goal tonight is to really see, have we met these goals? Are we staying on track with the design as it develops with HDR and the greater team? And to really get to the details of that, Lee is going to talk about what we heard in our last series of workshops around this topic.
Thank you, Gina. So as we mentioned early last year, the city held a public meeting to share the first design draft for the project. Many of you shared your thoughts and your comments, and we wanted to revisit some of those comments today since they're still very much informing the design process. The points fell into these few broad categories, you know, from the site's ecology through infrastructure considerations to the different programs and activities that will be provided on the site, as well as the site's historic significance, especially for Pensacola's Black community, and the future plans for an educational center on site. It is important to note that at this time, the educational center has not yet been funded. However, it is still part of the long-term plan for the site. You'll see that in the updated drawings that there is a space reserved for it. These are a few examples of the comments that we received. You see that there were concerns around debris that was found on site, as well as the plans for stormwater management, as Mayor Robinson noted earlier. So we can tell you that the city and the design team have visited the site and noted that there will need to be a cleanup effort as part of the implementation process, and that HDR's design definitely considers drainage and stormwater and includes multiple water retention features. There were various comments about the importance of keeping the site wild in a way, but at the same time providing space for educational, recreational programming. So it's really important to note that we're trying to reach that balance here between the different programmatic needs and opportunities, but also the kind of light touch approach and the preservation of existing trees and restoration of the local ecosystem. So looking a little bit more, sorry, a few of the additional notes, the programming around kayak access and storage, and then again, this intent for kind of a light touch or minimal intervention. Looking more specifically at the different elements of the design that emerged, again, out of the different workshops that we had as part of the framework process. These included an eco play area, so using primarily natural materials, an open lawn that would be flexible for different programming and activities, a water play feature. We find this to be one of the best ways to activate a site. It's fun to participate, it's fun to watch, and is such a great feature in the Florida climate. Spaces for experiential learning, just making the most of the rich local ecology and designing for hands-on learning opportunities. A scramble and overlook. There's currently an existing mound on the site that allowed us to climb up and see a view of the bay, and that's an experience that we really wanted to preserve as part of the park design. And an adventure trail, again, kind of making the most of natural materials and local ecology to create this environment that fosters learning and play. So you can see that the educational opportunities are a really important aspect of the project, both with an ecological focus as well as with a focus on the site's history and importance to the Black community, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. So since we are designers and we want to make sure that the design meets these educational needs, we reached out to the experts. In this case, they're Escambia County school teachers. So Angela is going to tell us a little bit about what we learned from them. Over to you, Angela.
Hi, Lee. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the meeting this evening. So for this data, we are very grateful for the collaboration of the Escambia County School District, specifically the coordinators for science and social studies, Carol Myers and Sherry Arnett. And they fielded a survey in early May to about 300 teachers. And the data that we got back was representative of about 43 teachers who responded, and these were science and social studies teachers, 57% of whom teach grades 5 through 8, and 78% of whom teach science, and 18% of whom teach social studies. And 61% of these have classes with 30 plus students. And so for the purposes of getting a high level kind of validation of interest from educators, we thought this was a very positive response. There was definitely strong interest on the science side, as well as some interest on the social studies side, and a little bit of a benchmark around what size student groups educators would be interested in bringing to the site. And of a basic list of needs that we surveyed on, the ones that were, the responses indicated the most popular kind of features are seating with shade, washrooms, lockers for storage of equipment, and lockers for student use. And on the next slide, I want to just acknowledge and thank the educators and the team at the Dixon School. The Dixon School has been, over the last year, with a group of 3rd and 8th graders, doing a kind of citizen science project on the site. And they graciously invited us out to see some of the content that their students have produced. And so we're sharing this here purely as an example of some of the kinds of experiential learning opportunities, having students go out to the site over, you know, on a kind of longitudinal basis over a period of time, gather data, do some analysis, and then present it in these kind of science fair boards. So again, thank you to the team at Dixon for just allowing us to share these images, again, just as an example of the kinds of experiences and the kinds of educational opportunities that the Bruce Beach site does inspire. I'm going to hand over to Alan on the HDR team to kick us off with the design update.
Thanks, Angela. So yeah, so in looking at the design update, of course, we started with the framework plan. So HDR was hired by the city to implement the Bruce Beach portion of the 2019 framework plan in early 2020. And then we assisted the CRA with phasing and budgeting for the project. You know, you have to take all those site elements and determine whether or not it falls within the city's budget. In early 2021, we were then asked to proceed with survey and design services for the project. Next slide. So this image from the framework plan shows a lot of the programming elements of the site that, you know, we had the goal of staying consistent with. The city has included SCAPE as project reviewer to work with HDR on the consistency with the framework plan. So just touching on some of the elements you see, there's the central entry plaza running through the middle of the site, which really is the start of the connection to all the other programming elements of the site, with the mound overlook on the left, learning garden over to the right, and then connection to the Maritime Park area for additional parking via a pedestrian marsh bridge. And then over on the left end of the site, you can see additional parking was considered along the south edge of Club Street. So a real mix of the natural, but also accessible with what the site currently gives us to work with. So next slide. The first part of the design update is we get a survey of the site. So we have to validate and verify you know, that framework plan and make sure how it fits on the site, you know, what kind of elements we may have to adjust, and where we might find out that there's some features on the site that we need to enhance or just work with, just leave in place. So some of the things we noticed were some of the rubble mound locations. You know, maybe they didn't fall exactly the way the framework plan would have them fall. Well, those are some elements we'll be able to work with, make adjustments to, and make slight adjustments to the framework plan, again, to keep that consistency. Other things we look at are the site utilities available for things like restrooms and water fountains, you know, power for lighting, those sorts of things. And you see here, one of the other things we looked at was a survey of the trees on the site. Here we're able to save several of the heritage species located on the site. You know, we found that there's some really nice live oaks out on the site, and also some cabbage palm groves, which were pleasant surprises on the site. Next slide. So the following slides just kind of show some of what we found there on the site. Again, one of the cabbage palm groves that we're actually going to work into the design. A live oak species there on the right. Next slide. And then a couple more live oaks. The one on the right, you know, it's too big to get in a photo. I mean, it's an enormous live oak located there along the edge of Club Street. So that side of the site, you know, it kind of gives you just this grand entry. It's also located right next to a palm grove, you know, that again we're working with on the site. Next slide. So of course, anybody that's been out to Bruce Beach know that there's also some things that we're going to have to take care of. You know, there's, you know, again, existing trash and rubble that's either washed up on the site or you know, was already there previously on the site. There are some piles, maybe some unsafe conditions we're going to have to work with, trying to remove from the site, make the site safer. And then, of course, you know, you have things that wash up from hurricanes and just bad weather that we get, you know, sometimes in the winter. So you see there's remnants of a boat there. And again, these are site conditions that we're going to have to, these are situations we're going to have to clean up before we invite the public to all parts of the site. Next slide. So there are things to work with on the site. You know, one of the things in the original framework plan was having a kayak launch to be located there on the beachfront. Well, we noticed that, you know, with the wave energy that the main beachfront gets, we realized an opportunity to relocate that kayak launch area to the left of the peninsula there to a location that's already being used to pull up boats and to pull up kayaks currently. So, you know, the site in a lot of cases kind of tells us what needs to happen as we go in and start investigating. Next slide. And so this is the current design update, you know, basically relaying out the site based on our site investigations, based on the survey that has taken place. And you can see that we have stayed very consistent with the original framework plan. A few features of the site, you'll see the main arrival area right through the middle of the site. That central alley will include a history plaza. We'll be able to display the cultural features and history of the site. Again, we were able to keep with the learning garden, the bluff overlook, and enhancements to the beachfront. You know, again, some of those palm groves that we were able to work with are located there on that beachfront. So a lot of those trees would be existing. And then again, you see the connections on both the east and west side of the site. So Robbie is actually going to get into a little more detail on some of these site areas we've been working on. Next slide, sorry.
All right, thank you, Alan. So I'm going to talk just a little bit more about these four main areas within the site. The first of which is the Arrival and History Plaza, which connects to Main Street with a bus drop-off and the connection of the central LA. So the main plaza that connects people down to the waterfront, which is, you know, one of the goals of the project. So some of the features in this Arrival and History Plaza include, in addition to the bus drop-off, a lawn space, which will be I guess a programmable, flexible space for activities, and the future building site of this educational building. And then along the eastern edge of that, this purple structure is a shade canopy that will have interpretive exhibits, so historical and cultural exhibits under that space. And also in the flex time could be used, you know, for pop-up markets and things like that. The central alley, that's, so it's a row of a double row of trees that can all the way down to the beach, similar to that photo on the upper right. So you've got the shade canopy and then the double row of trees that will provide shade. A shaded route for people to connect down to the beachfront. And all of the circulation within the site on this plan has been designed to be ADA accessible or wheelchair accessible. So it'll be fully open to everybody to circulate throughout. We also have some movable tables and seatings in this space, and then a lawn terrace for just group gathering on some just low seat walls. Okay, next slide. So this is I guess a section of that area that was just described. So the lawn's flexible, programmable space, the shaded plaza space for group exhibits, and then seat walls are located right off of Main Street. And then a rendering that helps you visualize this just a little bit better. So we don't have all of our materials picked out yet, but you can see the central alley, the double row of trees that connect you down to the beach. And we've got the shaded canopy on the right side. You see the shadows there, and then the seat walls on the left. So the learning garden, this is a place to to learn and explore, the eco play that Lee described, but it's also a place for the functional stormwater management with the biofiltration area behind that. So we visualize this as just a place to learn about the history of the site, but also the ecology of the site. So it'll be a mixture of both, with a water feature and a restroom structure located centrally. And this also connects over to the Marsh Bridge over Washerwoman Creek that connects to Maritime Park to the east. So we visualize the learning garden may have something like small mounds and features for active play, integrated natural and cultural exhibits, and that water feature. So this is just a section that shows what this might look like. So the third area is the beachfront. So as the central LA connects to the beach, it terraces off into a few different areas. And you can see these cabbage palm trees, or the palm grove that was preserved, indicated with the little the green stars. So those are pretty accurately located as to what's shown on our survey or what's able to be seen on the aerial photograph. So we're able to have some seating on the right side, the little cluster to the right side of the alley, and then we have a picnic area similar to the photo on the right. That's right up against the beach. We have the accessible kayak launch that comes off into the mitigation area, and then sand volleyball behind that. And then the final element within this area is that overlook, which is almost 20 feet tall and has a mound scramble that transitions into these terrace seat walls that connect over to the right side of the alley. Next slide. And just a view of that looking west. So you can see the mound scramble in the background, the picnic area, kind of central foreground, then the kayak launch off to the left, and then planted terraces on the right side as well. So this is the bluff area, which also includes the mound scramble, but we were able to preserve most of the existing trees in this area. So we didn't do a whole lot of grading, and we've got this walkway that meanders up the slope to that 20-foot overlook. And again, it's all accessible. And so areas where we weren't able to achieve the accessible walkway without doing significant grading, we've installed a boardwalk. So you can see that on the top edge of the drawing on the left. The brown walkway is actually a wooden structure that will allow us to maintain accessibility but not have to disturb the existing trees. And just an overview rendering representation of what this might look like. So we're looking from Main Street towards Washerwoman Creek. You can see the learning garden in the center, the terrace walls on the right, and then the stormwater biofiltration pond. It won't actually be standing water like that. It'd be more like native grasses that collect the stormwater. And then the lawn seating terraces in the foreground.
Yeah, so taking a look then at how we're going to build this project, right? And then what to expect moving forward. Looking at the phasing. So again, our initial approach with the phasing, you may have recalled the CRA meeting in early 2020 was to approach the project with design and construction in 3 to 4 phases. Then 2020 blessed us with all that it was able to bless us with, and kind of slowed things down a little bit. So what we're currently looking at doing is revising the project into a couple of phases, or even if feasible, constructing the project all at once. And that's from both the design and construction standpoint. So looking at the schedule moving forward, we're in the 30% design phase for phase 1 right now, which is roughly half the site. And so the design, permitting, and bidding for phase 1 would come to an end at the end of this year. And then construction would start in 2022. So at the end of the phase 1 design, we could begin the phase 2 design while phase 1 is being constructed. And what that does is it keeps the project moving forward from a construction standpoint and from a design standpoint, basically, eliminating the pauses along the way. So with that, we'll go back to Lee, who's going to discuss some of the interpretive signing features for the project.
Thank you, Alan and Robbie. So as we mentioned earlier, one of the key goals of the project that came out of the framework engagement process is to mark and commemorate the African American history and heritage on the site. And the intent is for that to happen in 2 ways: through interpretive signage, which you can see on the left as an example, and through public art that is embedded as part of the design of the site itself. These are just a few examples that we found inspiring for how public art can be incorporated into design elements as something that's more embedded as an embedded narrative. What we spent a little bit more time thinking about and kind of considering is this idea of interpretive signage. And so we wanted to share with you today an example of interpretive signage that SCAPE developed recently for a project in Lexington, Kentucky, where we collaborated with a local historian and worked closely with a group of local experts who reviewed the work and helped guide the process. So this series of signs covered different aspects of the project, which is a multimodal transportation kind of linear park system that traces the historic town Branch Creek through the city of Lexington. So what we're seeing here are the front, back, and side of kind of freestanding site panel or interpretive sign. And the content of each of these signs, there's a series of them, kind of ranges from social history of the site. So for example, the urban development of Lexington over time, the cultural and history of the region, in this case, this unique karst geology that is really closely tied with some of the cultural characteristics of Lexington, including the famous Kentucky racehorses, all the way to the high quality bourbon that is associated with the region, as well as, for example, the local urban ecology and the connection that it has to this idea of a living infrastructure that serves the needs of contemporary urban environment. So we thought this was a helpful example, especially, but both in terms of the type of content that includes these written paragraphs, as well as historic maps, photographs, and original graphics, but especially in terms of the methodology. So our plan for the next steps on this project include reaching out and assembling this advisory group of experts and community members. And we've had a few preliminary conversations with folks and are trying to put together this group that can help inform the process of developing the content and the design. We're planning to gather information and available historic documents. So this is our opportunity to actually invite you to reach out to us or reach out to the city if you have information or if you have historic documents that you feel would be interesting and valuable to include as part of this process. And we are planning to work with local historians to help us synthesize this information and compose the content for the signage. So with that, I want to thank you for bearing with us through the presentation, and I'd like to open it up for a few questions in the larger forum before we break into the smaller group discussions. So we have received a few comments in the chat. If you'll excuse me 1 second, I'll read through them quickly. One thing that is that came up in a couple of questions is, I think it's worth clarifying the restroom component of the program. So Alan or Robbie, I would hand it over to you. I know that we had initially talked about including restrooms in the educational facility, but since that is not kind of coming online in the near future, we did discuss including restrooms as a freestanding independent component. I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so that is the case. You know, you would like for one facility to be built all at one time, but we also recognize that this was a specific comment provided by the public on multiple occasions. I see Ms. Albrecht has also, you know, provided the comment. We've talked about that before. So we are currently looking at the best placement for the restroom facility, and then working with the city on the type of facility that we could expect.
Thank you, Alan. Another question is about the ability of the different design features to withstand hurricane or flood conditions. Again, for you, either Alan or Robbie.
So yeah, I mean, you know, everything that's closer to the coastal edge of the project, you know, that is a consideration. You know, we have the ability to do wave run-up analyses and things like that to determine the, you know, the level that the site needs to be designed to. I mean, so that's certainly a consideration with the site. That being said, being next to the water, I mean, you know, there will be, you know, some sacrificial features of the site. You know, you don't want the site to become industrial looking. The best thing that we can do is stay with keep with the natural features of the site. That's really one of the most resilient things you can do with the site, is allow the natural to take care of the site.
Lee,
yes, please.
Lee, I had wanted to comment. I think much of what the design you're seeing brought forward tonight has a lot of the components of what we had funding to actually implement and construct, which I think is the most important part to get started. There are some other features, restroom in the building. We will be going out as soon as we get your final plan. We're looking to go look for some other additional, perhaps match our 18.6 million that the city is putting into this and find a way to get another 18.6 million or 18 million into the project. And so we do anticipate that and think in some way or another, if we could find a way to put the building in. But again, I know the task we gave you was phases 1 and 2, which did not include the building. But we are still looking at that and would like to figure out how to put the restroom or some way or another, get the restroom facility sort of where it would go with the eventual building and what we could do. So I did at least want to comment on the restroom, and also at least comment on what the city would like to go do. You know, if we do plan to go seek an additional 18 million in match to finish some of the other design functions that were not included in here.
Thank you, Mayor. There was also a question about, since we already have you unmuted, let me see where this was. What is the anticipated construction budget for the project, and whether there's an understanding of the expected maintenance costs of the park at this time?
So yeah, that's something we've just begun working with the city on. The latter part of the question, the maintenance portion, making sure that they're the appropriate corridors to be able to adequately maintain the park. You know, designed in. What was the first part of the question? I'm sorry.
I think the first part was the budget. I do believe
that is mentioned. The budget was just under, I think, $8 million for the entire site. So, you know, with design and everything else considered, you know, we're probably looking in the $7.5 million range for construction of the site. Sorry, Mayor.
We do have that planned. I think a portion of it is included in the original 18.6, and there's obviously other parts that are not going to be doable, which is why would like to seek the match, other type of a match to it that would enhance. We do believe it will produce value beyond it. I think certainly, I know James Lima has been a part of your process and your team, and what will come around for what we hope to see is what we've seen all these amenities create is an additional investment in the CRA, which I think should have more than enough funding to be able to come through and do whatever. The maintenance should mostly be on the landscaping and the other part. There's very little, I guess, building. There is certainly surfaces that are included in this process, sidewalks and a variety of other things. But this area is fairly resilient and high, certainly higher than most of the areas that are along the waterfront. At least it definitely has had things wash onto it that would have to be removed. But for the most part, the infrastructure that I think is going to be, the amenities that are going to be put in, I think should survive and should be resilient. I think that's part of what's good about this is the resiliency that we've seen in the storms that have happened, whether it was Sally, whether it was even this past weekend. Those things, I think have the ability to have some resilience to it because of the height at which they already are.
Definitely.
Thank you. One question, since I know that you've kind of given a lot of thought to the existing trees and existing plant species on site, there was a question around the existing exotic species, such as the China berry trees. Is the plan to keep those, or would those be removed?
We would like to remove as many of the unnatural species. We'd love to find a way to eradicate those. I mean, whether we get every single one of them, I mean, can't guarantee that, but I mean, I think that's our goal.
All right. So with that, I think, or one other point to clarify, there is a question around who will be the experts on history and culture. This is a process that we had just started, and so we're kind of building on the network of folks that we've encountered through the framework plan process, but are trying to expand our reach and are in the process of reaching out. So if anyone has suggestions or recommendations, please feel free to reach out. We would greatly appreciate it. So with that, and before we break into smaller groups, I wanted to turn the tables around a little bit and ask a few questions of our participants, or at least ask you to think about these things as we jump into the smaller discussions. And again, if you have thoughts, feel free to drop them in the chat or contact us after the meeting. One thing we talked about early on is this idea of balance, the importance of celebrating and kind of preserving the local ecology while making space for educational, recreational programs. Do you think that the design is hitting that balance now? Do you think it is kind of leaning more heavily in one direction than the other? That's something that we would be interested to hear from you. And then thinking back to the goals that we discussed earlier in the presentation, and let me try to kind of, without making you dizzy, flip back so we all have them in our front of mind. Connecting people to the water, restoring and enhancing local ecology, marking and commemorating the African American history and heritage at the site, designing for educational activities, and creating a cultural and educational destination at the water's edge. So really what we're hoping to discuss with you in the smaller groups is, are we meeting those goals? Is the design kind of going in the right direction for these? So bear with me again as I flip through to our final slide. So what we're going to do is, and Jessica is working on setting up our breakout sessions as we speak. You'll see a pop up at the bottom of your screen with these 3 topics suggested. We will break into 3 smaller discussion groups talking about local ecology. That will be with April and Jessica. Programming and activities, that will be with Robbie and myself. And history and education, and that will be with Alan, Gina, and Angela. So before we do that, I also want to remind you that we have the in-person meeting that will take place tomorrow afternoon, weather depending, either in Maritime Park or at City Hall from 5:30 to 7 p.m. You'll be able to meet the HDR team, Angela, city representatives, and discuss the project further. And then we are, as I mentioned, recording the meeting, so this will be available to view or to share later on. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or anything that you haven't had a chance to discuss as part of this meeting today. So with that, Jess, I think we're ready for the breakout groups.